Wait, is that what you're wearing? Well, yeah, I mean, come on, look at me. I at least tried. You couldn't try. You couldn't. I don't know why I even bothered.
One, you're like a dream come true. Two, just wanna be with you. Three, girl, it's plain to see that you're the only one for me. And four, repeat steps 1 through 3. I make you fall in love.
Okay, and there we go. Oh, yeah, who's a spiffy kaiju? You're a spiffy kaiju, yes you are. Hello, kaiju family, and welcome back. Yours truly, the Kaijuologist, here to raid again. We are going to be tackling my top 10 favorite Godzilla films this evening. As promised, this was initially supposed to be the 3,000 view celebration, and now we're up to 4,000 views. So thank you to everyone who's been checking out the channel and participating. Unfortunately, I know the channel's been kind of dead lately, and that's on me. I own that. But worry not, there's still been a lot of good monster action going on in my life. As some of the longer time viewers may be aware, I'm involved in the theater community of the Mile High City, Denver, Colorado. And these last few months, I had the privilege to co-direct with a good friend of mine and also choreograph Evil Dead the Musical. So, I mean, come on, you can't really fault me for that. It's Evil Dead the Musical, right? This one, I asked for viewer ideas. I wanted to have a quick little election as to see which, category was appropriate for the 4,000 view celebration. We didn't have a ton of people vote, but I appreciate the ones who did. And they voted top 10 favorite Godzilla films. So before I go into this, just a quick reminder, these are not necessarily the films I consider to be the strongest Godzilla films or the best, the most quintessential. These are just right now my top 10 favorites that, I sat down this morning and really made myself lock it in, really make the decision. It wasn't a lot of fun, but we're going to have a lot of fun. Anyway, these are just, I tried to think about right now, if I could sit down and watch any 10 films right now, what would I be most excited to watch? And that's where I went from this. Maybe it'll change. Maybe in 2-3 years I'll throw up a different one. Anyway, enough talking. You guys are here for a countdown. Let's give you a countdown. So I figure let's start really strong and really controversial. Let's just hit it off. Number 10, I'm locking in Godzilla versus Hedorah, or Godzilla versus the Smog Monster. Now, you gotta love a movie like this, right? I mean, think about what was this pitch to the studio? Hey, Mr. Tanaka, I want your icon of a monster to fight a giant sludge shit heap, basically, from outer space, and it eats pollution, and it's great. Don't worry, it's gonna be great. And yet, director Bano pulled it off. I appreciate why a lot of people don't care for this production. Now, the characterization of Godzilla is off-putting. I agree. It's easily the laziest in example of trying to incorporate the King of the Monsters into any film. Almost any film in the Showa, Heisei, Millennium period does a much more mature job, a more imaginative angle to introduce Godzilla into the plot. This is very much more the Smog Monsters spotlight, and Godzilla shows up when it's convenient, unfortunately. So why is it my number 10? Honestly, I'm just such a stickler for innovation, first and foremost. It's also, of any film, in the Showa period, other than the very first 1954 Gojira, there's really no other film that just has such naked politics about it, which I do appreciate. But director Bano also just a really sophisticated eye for cinematography. This is a very different kaiju film broadly than what you normally see in this genre. You can freeze frame almost any shot and have a discussion about the imagery, and it ties right back into The metaphors, the general intellectual discussion this director was having. And there's just not a lot of kaiju films that are this sharp and this unique with it. There's also not a lot of kaiju films that have, acid trips and crazy hipster bands and, hallucinogenic fish dance parties.
Today, we're going to teach you some fun facts about salmon and a brand new dance. Let me introduce to you a brand new dance.
In 50 years of Godzilla films, very few are so have this crazy art house vibe to it. I also really like our new title monster. Hedorah was really innovative for its time. When you think about what Toho had been doing with kaiju up until the 70s, Hedorah is a really wild departure from the standard. Moving along to number 9. This one was a little trickier for me. Honestly, I felt really good about number 10. Number 9 was kind of a battle between two films that I really do enjoy. The one that lost the battle, I'm going to throw an honorable mention here to Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, 1991, one of the earlier Heisei films. I really do enjoy it for its kind of B-movie popcorn technique. I don't even know what you would call it. But I like in that movie kind of the poetic ebb and flow of Godzilla and King Ghidorah, that they both kind of have a past and a present that have to overlap. I love the introduction of Mecha King Ghidorah. Melee battles, it actually has some solid melee battles as opposed to most of the Heisei period. The problem is the narrative of this film is just a complete garbled mess. I'm not sure time travel has ever been handled so sloppily. And it's infuriating too. It's right at the moment Toho decides they want continuity. They're really doubling down for continuity for this film series. And then they introduce the time travel aspect that, if you think about long enough, ruins huge swaths of the Heisei period, right? Because, Biollante never happened now, right? So did Space Godzilla even happen? It creates holes everywhere the more you think about it, and even the film on its own is like a paradox that caves in on itself. That's okay. It's fun. It didn't make the cut. The reason I was rooting for it is it does have some really unique politics about it, but one of these latter movies we're going to be talking more about those, and frankly this latter movie does a better job. So, what is number 9? Number 9 is Return of Godzilla, 1984. Not unlike Smog Monster, wears its politics, its philosophy very much on its sleeve, which I appreciate. It's just another unique entry in the series. It's one of only 2 films, I think soon to be 3 films, that it's just a solo adventure for Godzilla, and it really takes time to focus on his character and really give him a personality and a side to the monster we haven't seen really since the 54 film. He's menacing, he's animalistic, but there's also that tragedy to him again that we lost as he became kind of comic book hero into the 70s. There are varying degrees of how successful all of this is. Some of the special effects miss the mark a bit. Honestly, some of the politics of it haven't aged as well, and that's not just like a Cold War thing, I don't think, because I think of some of the earlier entries and their politics and their philosophy seem to have kept up much nicer, retained a lot of their power, their energy, whereas this film, a little didactic and a little oversimplified for the time, but still a brilliant way to reintroduce Godzilla, really bring him back to his roots. And something I appreciate too is just some of the hard science fiction they bring back again, and also the sense of Godzilla really being a figure of horror again. He is once again really treated with a sense of menace and power and fear, which I love. Now, I kind of ding some of the special effects. Other areas of this film are absolutely amazing. The city destruction sequence, you're hard-pressed to find a better urban destruction sequence in a kaiju film. Even in 1984, this sucker still rivals, I'd say, some of Kaneko's better shots into the Gamera series of the late 90s. Okay, so number 8, I'm probably going to have a few more fans hissing at the screen at me. That's okay. Let me know. Let's have a discussion here. Anyway, number 8, I'm tossing to GMK, Godzilla Mothra, King Ghidorah, the title that never ends. Also, kind of a movie that never ends. Uh, so, what I was kind of hinting at with Godzilla versus King Ghidorah, that film has a really fascinating discussion about Japanese nationalism, Japanese pride in general, which when Godzilla starts in the 50s is a pretty taboo subject. You couldn't really depict the military on film, and you certainly didn't do it in a positive manner. And Godzilla, being the unique plot device that he is, allowed them to kind of have, a kind of pat on the back for the military without suggesting anything about war. Godzilla versus King Ghidorah, most people know about the scene where the Japanese soldiers are stranded on the island and the American soldiers get taken out by the Godzillasaurus. Uh, Pretty controversial for its time, actually. They received several complaints from American vet groups that didn't want the film aired, I think, on cable television here. I'm not sure they even wanted it released in America. It was, so what can you do? No censorship, right? So this film, moving along to number 8, this film, Kaneko's one swing at the Godzilla series, digs right back into those politics and is actually a lot harsher about it. The whole idea being that Godzilla is an embodiment of all the veterans, all the military personnel who sacrificed their lives in World War II and were forgotten or mistreated or just kind of politely swept under the rug. And this idea pokes into the series a bit, but it's not something I think Honda ever really felt strongly about. Honda did serve in the military, and I think he had a very different idea of how to handle those discussions of national pride. Whereas Kaneko, he kind of fetishizes it a bit. Fetishize? You know what I'm saying. He has a more glamorous take on it. But it's an idea that's been around almost as long as the film series has existed, that Godzilla is not just a symbol for nuclear destruction. He's also a reminder of kind of the shame of a culture that disavowed its military and its accomplishments in World War II. Yeah, I don't know. Frankly, it's a really messy argument, but I gotta give Kaneko points for wanting to have that discussion. It's really, I mean, it's going to be in the top of most kaiju fans' film list. It's a really good-looking movie. You got to give it points for bringing back Baragon. Baragon looks great. The Godzilla suit is fascinating and just really classic. It's one of the favorites, and for all the right reasons. It's intimidating. It's that pure blue eye thing it does is great. There's just so many stunning shots throughout the movie. The special effects are hard to rival. And now some of the drawbacks. The reason, 5 years ago this would have been probably easy in my top 5. The more I watch it, the more I don't. I appreciate what Kaneko did. I think with a film series this long, you're almost obligated to take risks like this. But it doesn't feel very Godzilla to me. He's too evil. He's too deliberately malicious, and that's not how I think Godzilla really, the true essence of the character of Godzilla, is not outwardly evil. Likewise, as I've beefed before, I just can't stomach the idea of King Ghidorah as a good guy. Don't care for it. Mothra's not bad, but even Mothra, yeah, I mean, these teenagers had it coming. But it's still weird, the idea that Mothra specifically rises out of the ocean to kill a bunch of, punk-ass teenage kids. That doesn't even feel very Mothra to me. The monster designs, like I said, I think Godzilla's great. Mothra, I don't mind too much. I kind of like that they took her a little more insect, almost waspy. King Ghidorah is just a big miss, all across the board. It's too small, it's too underpowered, the weird Baran idea in the face. I like Baragon for the most part, but you don't get a lot of Baragon. I will offer that I think the designs throughout the film are intentionally a little more cartoony than what most kaiju films want to achieve. I really think Kaneko wanted to create a monster film where you were thinking more about some of the symbolic background to the monsters rather than sitting there the whole time trying to convince yourself that they are real. It's a style we see in theater. We call it Brechtian, old German playwright, whose whole philosophy was revolved around the idea that you shatter the illusion right away. So if the audience isn't focused on the illusion, they're focused on the substance of the show. And I honestly think Kaneko kind of wanted that. I think part of the reason some of these monsters, I mean, even the Godzilla suit, which I adore, does have almost a puppety, almost comically evil aspect to it. And I think that's part of the point. So it really, I mean, it does a lot right. It needed some editing. It needed to be cut down a little bit. And God, why we couldn't have seen Varan, Baragon, and Anguirus, I don't know. But it's an absolute standard for all the right reasons. Okay, and now we hop along right to number 7, a Godzilla film that I would argue is possibly the most underrated, maybe the most underrated Godzilla film, and that is Terror of MechaGodzilla. This one was tricky too. Sometimes it feels like a toss-up between this one and the first Godzilla versus MechaGodzilla. I like, first of all, the return of Honda brought so many nice elements of this franchise back that we hadn't seen for a long, long time. It's in general a much darker film. Even the aliens are, okay, their suits are absolutely preposterous, but their actions are decidedly creepier. I mean, you think about this whole thing of like, yeah, we'll save your daughter, and now we turned her into a cyborg. Now she's a robot remote control for our giant robot. It's pretty twisted. It's actually pretty twisted. And as I've advocated for in the past, you really need the Japanese cut on this one. It's not a perfect film, but again, I appreciate that there was a sense of maturity again. There was a sense of sophistication again. Titanosaurus is an awesome kaiju and really fun to see a very classic standard kaiju back in the mix. He's not a crazy alien. He's not a sludge pile who feeds off pollution. He doesn't have a chainsaw on his stomach. He's a pretty standard dinosaur. And yeah, I mean, I've always heard people argue it's kind of a ripoff of Gorgo. But just the ears, folks. Like the rest of Titanosaurus, Gorgo didn't have the cool fantail. Give Titanosaurus some credit, damn it. Yeah, I like to, the stakes of this one are a little raised because in our earlier entry with Godzilla versus MechaGodzilla, you have Godzilla with an ally up against MechaGodzilla. So it's a good showcase to show off the arsenal of MechaGodzilla, but then this film to have Godzilla up against two monsters, and Titanosaurus throws in a good punch or two, absolutely. I think as unfortunate as it was that there's not a really good, moment for the series to end on, I argue that this really wasn't a terrible way to wrap up the Showa period. We got one last go with Honda. We got some really good music, some really good cinematography. It's definitely one of the best looking films of the 70s. So if I'm doing my math right, I think that leaves us at number 6. I'm going to pull out Godzilla Tokyo S.O.S. Another MechaGodzilla film. But just a very classy affair in general. It's just a fun movie. It's a really fun movie. Pacing's pretty decent. But the depictions of the monsters visually are just incredible. Mothra looks amazing. She looks better than she has since the 60s. The MechaGodzilla Kiryu suit still looks really good. Godzilla looks really good. The destruction sequences are probably the best of the whole Millennium period. Now, the reason it feels like such a classic kind of kaiju film, I mean, the music helps. The cinematography helps. The characters are exactly what you expect. A bunch of military personnel, scientist folks. but it's also riffing off of, I mean, elements of the very first Mothra, the 1961 original film. Uh, but it also is just kind of copycatting a lot of. Man, I'm good at making up words tonight. Copycatting? Anyone like that one? Yep. Must be working for Donald Trump this summer. I mean, the whole thing with the two Mothra larvae, the fact that there are even two Mothra larvae, the way they gum up Godzilla at the end. I mean, everything about the film does have a kind of been there, done that effect. And yet it all looks so good. And the pacing is such that anytime things start to get a little too obvious, or it's just kind of a little too on the nose with the homage it's trying to pull off, you get some half-baked action sequence that comes out of nowhere. It really, I'm not, I understand some people like get frustrated with this film for how much it apes off of past films, and there is kind of this weird haze of mediocrity about the film, to be honest. And yet, it's just so damn entertaining, I can't help it. Number 6, folks, Tokyo S.O.S. Ooh, top 5, folks. If you got predictions, now's the time to make them. Number 5, we're going to hit up Ghidorah, the three-headed monster. You can't miss this one. You just can't miss this one. I mean, the introduction of Godzilla's greatest foe ever, tying in Rodan into the larger Toho Kaiju universe. I mean, and it's a four-way battle royale of monsters, of like the most classic Kaiju Toho monsters that they've ever established. I mean, I think Legendary is trying to basically just redo this film, but, with CGI and everything, which great, good for them. Oh, but let's play that game again. I'm gonna pitch you a movie, okay? So, hey, Mr. Tanaka, I got a rough draft for a script for the next Godzilla film. So I'm thinking it's gonna be kind of a spy detective thriller thing, and there's gonna be like a foreign princess, and they're trying to assassinate her, right? But then this comet comes down, and it's not a comet, it's an egg with a giant monster in it. Back to the princess, she jumps out of an airplane, and now she thinks she's like a prophetess from Mars! And they have to defend her, and the monster comes out of the egg, and it's got 3 heads. So if there's 3 heads, I was thinking Rodan, we haven't used that monster in a decade. Everyone loved Mothra, so how about we have 4 monsters on screen? Do you like it, Mr. Tanaka? It's one of my favorites. It's just supremely entertaining. In college, when some of my roommates started to give me shit about the Godzilla films, friendly, they wanted to see what it was. This was the first one I showed to them. 'Cause it just has, I don't know, it's just entertaining on so many levels. And again, I mean, even the most jaded, cynical person is going to have fun watching that 4-way monster rumble at the end, with Mothra on the back of Rodan and Godzilla throwing rocks at Ghidorah. And it is such an ambitious film for its time. It really, it's funny, I've talked about this film so many times without actually doing a review of it. Maybe that'll happen. Maybe there's no point anymore. But I really do think this just was such a wake-up call for what the next bar of kaiju films was going to be. I mean, you think about, for the rest of the Godzilla series, I mean, Godzilla versus Hedorah, right? Every other film has to have 3-4 monsters in it to even feel like, a proper Godzilla film anymore. It also introduced us to Hero Godzilla, anthropomorphic Godzilla, which some people are frustrated with. There's definitely, I think even Tomiyuki Tanaka admitted he really wished the franchise hadn't gone that way. And yet, if a franchise has to exist as long as this one has, you're going to have to find ways to explore with the character of Godzilla. Number 4, it's getting tense now, folks. Number 4, I'm going to lock in Godzilla 2000. This is... Most of these films have a huge reminiscent factor for me, and that's why they're some of my favorites. This film in particular, my first time seeing a proper dude in a latex suit kaiju film on the big screen. I saw it a few times because I was so enthralled by it. But it's one that really just has never gotten tired for me. Now, I'll admit, I think I pointed this out in my review for the film. The Japanese version is actually pretty terrible. It's really slow. A lot of the music feels out of place. There's some nice little touches, but in general, the American cut is superior. So much so that Toho took back the American cut and used it as their cut. They liked it so much better. One of the things I appreciate about this film is first of all, it's a huge course correction in a lot of ways. Not only did it help to get the stink out of the room of the Roland Emmerich, Dean Devlin abomination, but it also reintroduced so many things that I think the Heisei period had just gotten kind of lazy about. First of all, interesting melee brawls, really convincing model work. The model work here, I mean, they had to catch up to Kaneko and the Gamera series, right? But man, do the special effects look so much better. And it's only like 2-3 years after Destroya, so someone at Toho was busting their ass over this one. Interestingly enough, they did scale down Godzilla quite a bit, and I think that helped them with just creating models that had more detail. If the monster doesn't have to dwarf everything quite as much, then you can get a few more just fun little details in the cityscape that really do bring it to life. I like Orga, honestly. It's kind of too bad that there isn't a little more to the fight sequence or a little more history, or that we never got to see it again. I mean, that would have been a fun one to just pop up in Final Wars, right? It's an alien invasion. How about they have Orga back? Could have been fun. No, unfortunately, Orga just gets, one quick shining spotlight at the end of this film. But I like how many kind of tropes of the Showa series we bring back. I mean, it is, at its heartbeat, kind of an alien invasion plot, and yet it's so much more subtle. It's not nearly as garish as, like, the Xylians and stuff were, or the monkey people. Oh, God, there's some real bad aliens in Godzilla movies. This alien almost seemed practical in some ways, almost believable maybe even. But we introduce a new design for Godzilla that I think to this day is still a fan favorite. I mean, the really jagged, almost crystal-like dorsal spikes he has now. I still to this day think it's absolutely genius, this idea of a Godzilla-like search team. They chase Godzilla like tornado chasers chase bad weather, right? And what I love about that is not only does that create a very plausible reason that these people keep running into Godzilla, it's not a plot contrivance, it's built into the plot intelligently. But it also gets back to the heart of the kind of character I've always felt with Godzilla. I think Ishiro Honda really supported that Godzilla is not just evil for evil's sake. He's a tragic animal. He is part of nature. He doesn't quite fit in with nature, but that's not his fault. And so by treating Godzilla almost as like a tornado or a hurricane, the way storm chasers do, I feel like we just very conveniently in the first 2-3 minutes of the film get right back to the essence of what I think traditional Godzilla truly is. At least my favorite depiction of the monster. But like I said, it's not just how good the special effects are. Specifically, the opening shots of our little Godzilla storm chasers going through the cities and the countryside following Godzilla are just great. The cinematography, the visual punch of it is just gorgeous. That's just one of those Godzilla films. It's such a feel-good Godzilla film. I never get sick of it. I really never get sick of it. All right, folks, now to number 3. Interestingly enough, a few similarities to the film I was just talking about. Number 3, moving into Godzilla vs. Biollante, 1989. My favorite of the Heisei period, and just one of my favorites in general, obviously. So what I was talking about is it's funny that Orga, right, is a monster who wants to feed off of Godzilla's DNA, almost wants to transform itself into another Godzilla, and even tries to eat Godzilla at the very end. And then here's this film where Biollante is a genetic clone of Godzilla. You know, she's got a little rose plant in her. She's got a little dead scientist daughter in her too. She's got some variety going on, but you still have a very similar shot in their final climactic battle of the giant towering Biollante puppet trying to almost devour all of Godzilla. Funny little similarities. They kind of end there though. What I, this was one of the first films I did a review on for this channel, and so if you want a lot more detail, you can go back to that one. But I appreciate there's just kind of a maturity about this film. It brings some hard science fiction to the table. The whole elements of genetic engineering, while pretty implausible, aren't just insane. It's not an alien or an underground Seatopian kingdom in the water. But everything is just handled nicely. The plot, yes, has a few divots that are frustrating, but we introduced this fun stuff with the psychics and Mickey that was actually refreshing the first time you saw it at this point. The idea of Godzilla, senses Biollante out there and needs to meet her. He needs to connect with someone who's just like him is interesting. The special effect work in this film is really strong. I mean, the attack on Osaka looks really good. The final fight with Godzilla and Biollante is stunning. I just like Biollante too. She's such an interesting, different kind of monster. We hadn't had a giant plant monster. Arguably, outside of Mothra, I haven't had a female kaiju. Although I see some people argue that Titanosaurus was supposed to be a female. Could be. I'd love it. I don't know where this idea comes from, but great anyway. But Biollante is pretty consistently referred to as a she. But just, kind of the juxtaposition of the two kaiju is so interesting too. Even though they're basically just clones of each other, they look so different. They have different battle tactics. Even the battle with Rose Biollante, which seems like it should be nothing, is actually pretty entertaining. The film has a lot going for it. It has a great score, and just a lot of interesting ideas. Not all the ideas get the time in the sun that they deserve, but I would say this film just succeeds way more than it fails all across the board. It feels like a classic Godzilla film, but it feels like something much smarter and more sophisticated than what a lot of the Showa period let us stomach. This was also technically my first proper Heisei film that I ever saw, so again, the nostalgia factor every time I see that first opening shot where they do the little Godzilla cells and they slowly expand out until you see the brand new Godzilla suit. I love that music, I love that opening, I love everything about it. Okay, now we move into the Sophie's choice of any Godzilla countdown. At least for me, and I see a lot of people bounce around and struggle with this. So number 2, I know, heresy here. I'm going to put in Godzilla, or rather Gojira, the original 1954 film. The first time I hit 1,000 views on the channel, this was the celebratory review, was that first black and white film. There's not a lot I can say now that I didn't take like 45 minutes saying before, or that countless other critics have brought up. I can go for days on this film. It is absolutely criminal how underrated it is in the larger discussion of cinema history, I think. It is a really dark, strange, interesting film, but it's also a very tight product. Unlike a lot of films in the Kaiju series, there's hardly anything that is brought up plot-wise, character-wise, that just dangles there and doesn't have a conclusion, and with that, a very satisfying conclusion. The entire statement with Serizawa's death at the end, the way Emiko gets to, Ogata, I think, gets to be with the man she loves, and this whole love triangle gets solved, but it gets solved at this terrible cost of this man's suicide. I mean, more than a suicide, a sacrifice to protect the world from his invention. It speaks so much about what the production team really brought to this film and what it wanted to accomplish. And interestingly enough, I almost wondered about just taking this one and Godzilla 84 out of this countdown altogether because they're such outliers. Almost every other Godzilla film needs to revolve around some battle or something just a little more campy and hokey. And 84 at least, you have some of the boom pow with the Super X. This film, and this was an interesting criticism I read a few months ago that had never occurred to me. This critic talked about how fascinating it is that unlike almost any other movie that has a giant sweeping destruction sequence, this movie is really not asking you to kick back and enjoy the destruction sequence and to sit there and marvel at the special effects. It's very much challenging you to consider not just the past of what happened to Japan in World War, but is also challenging you to think about the specter of what future wars will look like too. It's such a conundrum trying to make people understand how dark and uncomfortable and really unforgiving this first film is. It's nothing like what the rest of the series became, what people tend to associate with Godzilla. But it's such a sharp product. Yeah, I could keep going and going, but I'd mostly just be repeating myself. And now you're all dying to know what the number one film is, right? What could it be? So number one, I just have no choice, you guys. My favorite Godzilla film is absolutely Mothra versus Godzilla, 1964. Again, one of the first films I did a review on. It's just an absolute masterwork. Yes, it is more reflective of some of the schlocky monster fights. Godzilla just became this cage fighter for the rest of his career. But this is the film where they still remembered the background of the 54 film. They still remembered some of the painful and scarier philosophies that film wanted to tackle and discuss. Likewise, the juxtaposition of this very graceful, beautiful butterfly literally sacrificing her life trying to fight against Godzilla, who is just the devil incarnate in this film. It's hard to beat, you guys. Eiji Tsuburaya, absolutely out of the ballpark with his special effects here. I mean, to this day, I still sit there and marvel at that initial battle Godzilla and Mothra have when she's still in her adult form. It's a point of contention for a lot of people. I actually like kind of the underdog audacity that the two little larvae end up subduing Godzilla at the end. But even the human characters, I think, are acted well. They do kind of become tropes of the series, honestly. The engaged political reporters. We'd seen that before, and we'll see it again. But something here just feels much more organic. I mean, and there's even some comedy bits that aren't forced and miserable. But especially once they get to the island, and it's about maybe a 15-minute sequence where once the reporters are on the island and they have to barter for the future of their country, to ask Mothra for help right after they couldn't get her egg back, after they arrive on this island and see the devastating consequences of the nuclear tests. It's such a in-your-face discussion about how cultures breed this distrust between ourselves, between each other, and that at the end of the day, we all, have to share the same Earth. If Godzilla destroys Japan, he'll destroy everything else. He'll come for your people too. Mothra doesn't have a choice. At the end of the day, we don't have a choice. We have to support our brothers and sisters. And I think that is one of the reporters towards the end. She gives this great little speech, and I think it encompasses so much of what Ishiro Honda always wanted to discuss with these films and always wanted even when he was thinking about other angles of, the politics of war, nuclear proliferation, this was the main core message he was always trying to get across to us, that we can't turn our back on anyone, and we owe it to always be respectful to other people's cultures and to lift people up. So, yeah, I mean, again, you want more on it, you guys, I got a lot more, but that's another film I could go for days lavishing praise on. It was one of the first, maybe the third Godzilla film I ever saw, and really, it's one of those films that as I get older, the more I watch, the more I really respect and appreciate it. And maybe that's our good conclusion to this countdown. The reason, I'm about to be 28 years old and I just keep coming back to these films is these films have grown up as I have grown up. Whenever I've needed to expand what I was looking for in entertainment, or as, I got more studied about storytelling, I mean, I think that's why I'm in theater more than anything, isn't it's not just acting, it's not just directing or choreographing, stage managing. It's this general appreciation I have for storytelling that really gets to me. And every time I'm hungry for something or I need an answer about storytelling, I can look through the breadth of the Godzilla film series, and I can always find something that reminds me either about the philosophy, the challenge that needs to be presented, maybe the sheer entertainment value. I just worked on a musical where we spray fake blood all over the audience. Sometimes people just need some good old-fashioned escapism. And that's what's so remarkable about this film series and why I can keep coming back to it. All right, you guys, thank you so much. 4,000 views and counting. Like I said, I hope to give the channel a little more steam going ahead here. Until then, I appreciate each and everyone who's been checking in, tuning in, leaving comments. Like I said, maybe leave me your top 10 favorites. Let me know what you think of my countdown. Always love some good discourse. All right, you guys, Kaijuologist, signing off from Denver, Colorado. We are the Mile High City. We're getting higher all the time.